ask you at this point, what is new for you, and what challenges you? And maybe what do you not buy here? What do you not accept? Just out of curiosity. Yes?
I'm not sure I don't accept this, but the idea that we create God
It's a hard one, huh?
is a hard one.
Yeah.
It's a challenging one. That's not.
I want you to just stick with that. Yeah.
Learn that.
Right. Okay, let's just take that question for a minute. Like, we create God, seriously, right? What do we understand by God? What does that word mean for us?
Well, at this point in my life,
That's fine, yeah.
love.
Okay, love.
Love and creation.
Okay, good. So love and creation. Is there anyone else who might want to voice in on that question? Like, what is God?
God is unfathomable.
God is
mystery. Unfathomable mystery. We
Okay.
get glimpses every so often.
Glimpses.
When you said about potential,
Okay,
I think that describes it for me.
okay. So we have love, mystery, and potential.
I'm always saying the Creator God.
Creator God, meaning?
The Creator.
Oh, okay. Well, David, now if we say God is creator, how do we know that?
Oh, there's this funny little story.
On the way to the fort. It's an act of faith. Very good. Okay.
Sister told me.
Sister. Excellent, Father. Excellent. You get an A. All right.
Someone said here, reality.
Reality. But is reality a static reality? What is reality? Even that question.
Precisely.
Huh?
Precisely what is reality.
Yes, right? So this is, all we're saying here is the real is constantly coming into being. It is not a given. And that constant coming into being is that act of consciousness, that movement of consciousness, that mind matter constantly forming. So love is not love, true love, the fullness of potentials. Love is always about future. It's never about, okay, you love me, I love you, all is well, right? It's because love involves suffering. Love involves sacrifice. Love involves forgiveness. Love involves looking together in the same direction, right? And so love is a very dynamic engagement. And therefore, love and mystery, I think, are correlated, right? Because we don't know the outcome of love. What is love pulling us toward? We can't say what the final destination of love will be. It is always more than we can imagine, right? And so mystery as the ineffable. We cannot say yet what we will be in love. But I like love as the fullness of potential, because if love was not our deepest reality, we might then not have hope. I think love and hope go together, because we're constantly living in that field of unending possibilities. And I think that is what God is, too. God is that love of unending possibilities, who is always coming in to reality, because love needs to be actualized, right? Love as an idea is a potential. Love embodied is the actualization, the reality of love. Love needs matter to be loved. So God is, in a sense, always coming into being. But it's happening so often because we're constantly loving, constantly, being drawn to something, that God seems to be this overarching, static, always has been, always will be. It is the illusion of consciousness in some ways, you see. We're caught up in what God is, and we can't extricate these things. We can't take consciousness out and speak about God. We can't even take ourselves out and speak about God, right? So there's something about this divine reality that is entangled with our lives. And it's hard for us to get our heads around it because we have been taught, we have been, trained that God is more than us precisely by the nature of divinity. But you see, that moreness is not something other than us. That is the uniqueness of the human person. So I want to just hold it at that, because that's where my next part of the talk is going to go. You just stick with the program here. Okay, yes?
My reaction to what you're talking about today, I've been dancing around in my head.
Yes.
Two forces that humanity deals with that drive our lives that we can't explain. One is love and the other is gravity. And you're suggesting that they're the same thing.
Pretty close. I mean, I'm not going to get a Nobel Prize for this by any means, but I think love, consciousness, and gravity are all so fundamental to what we're about, we cannot exist without them. In other words, without gravity, well, we just simply would not be sitting in the same room. Without the other forces, we wouldn't be equidistant from one another. Without love, we wouldn't be drawn to even coming here this morning, right?
I am correct that we don't know how gravity works. We just know that it does what it does.
That's correct. And we don't even know how love works, really. We have a few dopamine receptors, but I think that doesn't quite get it for me, Love is mystery, The heart of love is truly mysterious. I mean, people say, oh, did you see so-and-so got married to so-and-so? And you go, what? How did that happen, right? That's mystery, right? That's true mystery. Like, she loves him, he loves her, yep, that's how it is. Love sees in a way that our physical eyes are blind to, right? Love sees out of a center deep within us that is a mystical center, truthfully. And it sees something in the other, that it is drawn to that other in such a way that even words cannot define it. And one of the things, I didn't talk about this, but we are too wordy. Our words have gotten in the way of our reality. If love is our deepest reality, words are in the way of that. We parcel things out. We categorize things, and then we make judgments on those categories. When the whole of entanglement is based on the experience of interaction. It's the experience of relationality itself, where consciousness and relationship are come together. That's where reality begins to emerge. But we use a lot of words, and I think Westerners in particular were so wordy. So get over the words, right? And that's the thing. It's like enter into this deep energy, to use Teilhard's language, the energies of love. They're all around us. Yes, David?
It's difficult.
Difficult.
For me, the difficult concept is quantum entanglement, because as I understand quantum issues, they involve elementary particles, not human beings.
Well,
So this
right.
quantum entanglement and how it affects us human beings.
Yeah, so quantum entanglement is basically saying that what we consider matter on the particle level is really a wave-particle duality. Like everything exists. Matter is really not matter. What we call matter is really just fundamentally energy relationships, right? And so they're always existing within these fields. We live in fields of potential, fields of potential relationships. But matter is something that comes into being. In other words, it becomes actualized, particularized by an act of consciousness, by something that collapses the wave of the wave particle into the particle itself, right? So that's the thing. So I'm using a paper next semester on the human person as a wave-particle duality. We are particles, but we live in wave energy relatedness, right? And so our relationships are always affecting our particular lives, and our particular lives are always open to new relationships. So we're always forming, we're always in formation as persons. That's what we're finding. Yes?
Maybe ways that we know this are other than our brain. Can you talk about other ways of knowing?
Yes, I think the mind is not here. The mind is the field of our existence. It is our senses, our bodies, our emotional life, everything about us. I don't think of us as this static person who has a mind. I think of us as we're like eddies in a stream. Think of yourself as a stream of flowing currents around you. And there's a core, mysterious core that's called this person, right? And not that person, right? It's this personality and not that personality. So I take that core as the omega wholeness of this, of this field of energies. And so we're constantly being affected by everything. We're affected by, by this room, by the people in this room, by my thoughts. And we're a complex, ongoing constellation of dynamic energies in which the brain itself is constantly, creating ideas that will help shape this edifying of this flow of our lives. But you have to think of it as flow. We're in a flow of life. That's the whole thing. So the good news is that nothing stays the same. The good news is that we can change, that everything can change, that we're just part of something that's forming. That's the whole thing. We live and act as if it's all formed and now it's all falling apart. And because we act as if it's all falling apart, it's actually falling apart. If we lived and acted as if it is the whole thing in formation, the whole thing, you might say, is cruciform. It's all death and resurrection all along the way. So that's why the cross is symbolic of evolution itself. The whole thing is cruciform love. It's the letting go and the dying to that which separates us in order to enter into that which unites and vitalizes us. And that's our challenge. Our challenge is not to get stuck into those places and ruts where we stay the same. And then we start getting negative energy, right? It starts weighing us down. And it's all negative. It's all, the falling down. Everything's collapsing. And of course, it will collapse. So where the mind is, there the rest of the world lies, right? As the Buddha says, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. And that's the key. The mind being everything about us. And which is why, we do body work and energy work and on centering prayer and yoga. But what we have to do is not just limit those things to, I feel good now because I feel like I'm centered. We have to recognize that our centering now participates. This is the mystic, right? The more I'm centered, the less I need to be, closed in. The more I'm centered, the more free I am to be part of the whole. That's really what that means. So if I can just, I'm just looking at the time. It's 11. We have to what, Father?
12:30.
Oh, gosh, we have plenty of time. Great. Okay. Are there any other questions or thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Where's the heart then? I always thought of the heart as central, the mind. in
Yes,
relation
I
to
think
the heart.
the heart.
Something about the head. That
Yeah, the head.
worries me, people who live in their heads.
So Ian McGilchrist, if you haven't read the work of Ian McGilchrist, you really should. He wrote a book called The Emissary and Its Master. He's a psychiatrist who has talked about the left brain and the right brain, right? So the left brain, we have two halves, right? Left, right. So the right here is connected more with the body. It's involved with the emotions, with creativity, with connecting with the wider world. But what we do is we take senses, our senses take the information from the world through the right brain into the left brain that says, oh, that's a desk. Here's a desk. It has wood, it's square, so it analyzes it. And what McGilchrist has said, we have cut our right brain off, basically, after Descartes. And we're totally left brain, and you hear it all the time. How do we analyze this? What are the 5 steps I need to do to get to where I'm going to go? What's our data here? So we've cut ourselves off, so we don't have passion, creativity, freedom. Chaos theory is right brain. It's like, if you really want to be alive, I'm going to get back to your heart question. If you really want to be at home, you got to be at home with chaos. It's all falling apart. It's all good. So there's 2 ways. You go, it's all falling apart. Oh my God. We're in a crisis. It's all falling apart. Isn't this great? What's happening that's new? So if you're only in your left brain, you will fail to see the new that's emerging. If you're living at the heart is the integration of everything. It's that brings that left and right into a deeper center. We call it the cingulate gyrus in the brain, but that's okay. You can call it the heart. It's much better. The heart, and it brings it together, and it says, beyond analysis, beyond passion, there's something more. It's deeper. It's passionate. It's engaging, and we can make sense of it. And therefore, I think the way of the mystic, which is where I see the 21st century going, the way of the mystic. Teilhard wrote a lot on mysticism and evolution. The only way forward is inward, right? The only way to create is to be at home with oneself. That's the heart. In other words, I live where my emotions, my feelings, my psyche, and everything else is brought together with my thoughts of analysis, on what my judgments. And I think that, it's the question for us today is how do we get to that place of freedom? How do we get to that place where we're truly at home in this flow of life, that we don't have to get locked into or bogged down with, I'm not leaving my house because it's dangerous out there. This is a dangerous world and I need to protect myself. It's like, how do you get to the place where say, I will take every precaution to be healthy, but I am part of the flow of what's happening. And that's the place. I do think the place of the heart is essential, quite honestly. The mind must stand in the heart, and the heart stands in that field of infinite love, which is God. And I think the one who enters into that relationship becomes ever more free. I think the key to the whole thing, living in evolution, is freedom. This is something Bernard of Clairvaux wrote about in the 12th century, right? Jesus says, you will learn the truth, and the truth will set you free. Truth is the transparency of reality. When we live in that transparent reality in freedom, we then can do wild and crazy things. We can create the world in unimaginable ways. We lack imagination, we lack creativity, and we lack the zest and the courage to go forth. So, as Whitehead would say, live in the adventure. It's the adventure of the spirit, not the preservation of the spirit. So, yes, Tim.
So, Ilia, I think sometimes when, at least when I hear some of this, what I think I struggle with sometimes is it feels like it's sort of the relativization of God, like God becomes an act or an accident. I mean, evolution is all probability, right? Is God just a probable source, cause, presence,
Right.
or a certain one? And I guess I'm just, it's hard to trust, to put ultimate faith in something that's accidental or contingent.
Yes, even that language, Tim, right? That's very Thomistic language, accidental. That's fine. I appreciate it. And I think I completely understand your question. How can we have faith and trust in a God who's going to be contingent on, me, really, or any of us?
Actually, that's what I feel like there's, to say that God is love or God is originary presence is to actually posit a constant in the evolutionary experience, in the evolving. It doesn't mean God doesn't evolve or the universe doesn't evolve, but, to use Thomas's language, there's a first mover or a first force that the access and silence and centering and flow and love and energy and gravity. But it itself is the DNA of the whole thing.
I understand your question, and we have spoken that language for so long, it does not seem possible to have any other God. But here's what I think. It would be comparable to saying, Newton saying, we've always had absolute space, absolute time. How could we not? God is outside time, God creates space and time. And Einstein said, 9, that's not true. Space, there's no such thing. If I'm standing on a platform, I'm watching a train go by, and someone else is, somewhere else watching the same train, we're going to have a different experience of time because we're in different locations of space. And so Einstein said, they're not absolute. They're relative to one another. And that was so revolutionary. Space and time was so revolutionary. Most physicists said, Albert, you're wrong. That can't be. And the religious people said, no way, God creates, God creates time. What was God doing before time? The whole thing. So here's the thing. We have yet to have a religious evolution on the same scale as the physics evolution. Physics has changed our world radically. And religion has a hard time. It goes back to exactly, and I understand your concern. I do. We want a God we can feel. I want to be able to trust a God who is creator, who puts it all into being, who is first cause. But there's no, I don't want to, okay, it's getting near Christmas, so I don't, okay. I want you to have a very Merry Christmas, so I don't want to. But how can we talk about first cause when causality itself is no longer how life emerges? It is a constant interplay of relationships. That's how the whole Big Bang, in fact, what scientists tell us is this universe may emerge out of another. We don't know how this universe comes about. We do know that there are many other universes out there someplace. So all we're saying is the only way we can speak credibly about God is by understanding how matter itself forms and how consciousness is part of that matter. In other words, for us to say God creates means we're reading back. That's what we're doing. We're here and we're saying we're reading back into the universe. But there's no way to validate that. It's just, that was based on Aristotle's philosophy, of substance and matter. I know it's hard.
I mean.
You may not believe it,
No,
but
it feels to me more like there's a both and, but it doesn't.
well, you think of divinity, God, as infinite, ineffable potential of love. That's what we're talking about here. It's in God. The name God, Panikar would say God is the name. It's a Sanskrit name for light. And light, quite honestly, many scientists will say, is a synonym of consciousness. So these three things are not disparate from one another. They're actually connected. So imagine God God is the symbol of the fullness of life, the potential of what life can become. God, as Whitehead would say, God does not have a plan, God has a vision. God is that vision, right? God is the potential. All of Scripture is about promise. See, this is what I see, a new heaven and a new earth. The old will pass away. So there's a visioning throughout Scripture. There's a promise throughout Scripture. But there is no set guarantee in Scripture that any of this will come about. That's what the whole story is about. And that's where, if I can just kind of jump ahead here to, we'll skip that for the moment. And we'll come back to this. I want to just skip to Carl Jung, because I do think Jung brings together with Teilhard, if the universe is in birth, the human person is in birth. So we're not givens. We are processes. We're becoming human. We're becoming relational beings. If we want to talk about sin or the fall, it means that we're not fully relational, that we still live with, you might say, a constricted self. And therefore, God is not fully God on this earth. I mean, last time I checked, it doesn't look like the whole, reign of God has come about. So something is not taking place. And it's not just that God is waiting for us to wake up. It's that God needs us to be awakened. It's a different understanding of what we are in relation to what God is. And you can't extricate these things. We can't take God out. We objectify God, is what we've done. And we have God as an object of belief, when God is the subject of our own being. That's what we're saying. God is the eye of the eye. Without collapsing. It doesn't collapse God. It's just that we can't talk about God apart from that subjectivity. So I'm not trying to convince you, although I am. But can we do a little bit of Jung, and then we'll come back to see how Teilhard puts it. I should have put this before. So Jung, was a psychiatrist, a Swiss psychiatrist who dealt a lot with patients and psychosis. And he was a Calvinist, Swiss, whose father was a pastor. And like Teilhard, Jung had a lot of problems with Christianity. He felt that it was actually more of a burden to people than a liberation of the spirit. So as he began to, interact with patients and reflect on things, he began to develop what I might call a Jungian spirituality. I'm sure others have, maybe even a Jungian theology here. And he puts it in this kind of quippy way. The many gods become one, because we all have a lot of gods, The one God becomes human, and every human is to become God. And that is, what? Every human is to become God? Well, that's Athanasius, right? The whole incarnation is based on God became flesh, that, the human can become God. Irenaeus of Lyon, right? The glory of God is the human person fully alive. This is not anything different than the tradition teaches. But it becomes shocking to us. Every human has become God. Oh, my God. So he says, religion is a natural process of individuation. In other words, becoming fully formed as human person, fully aligned within, is the religious story. So he says individuation is integral to God's own becoming. And of course, who was the model here for him? I forgot how I put these slides together, quite honestly, but let me see. He says here at one point, one can only overcome the old God through becoming him yourself. What is old God, new God? Is there a new God, or is God just unchanging? Omnipotent, omniscient, ever-present, God never changes. What a dull God. How can you possibly have a God that never changes and say God is love? That makes no sense whatsoever. But okay. As one so he says the only way you can overcome the old God is through becoming God yourself, as one who seeks himself and no longer imitates heroes. You free yourself when you free yourself from the old God and his model. When you have become the model, then you no longer need his. Now that's a pretty bold statement. Pretty bold. And it seems to collapse God into a solipsism, like it's just all about us. So let me go on before we can the natural process of individuation. He says humanity's relation to divinity lay in its relation to the unconscious, which is the cosmic plenum. The unconscious is that field, is that infinite potential that even physics itself cannot, adequately grasp. Quite honestly, physicists today are up against a brick wall. The scientific method kind of doesn't hold anymore in quantum physics. So they're dealing with mystery. And he says that unconscious plenum is the ground of consciousness and meaning. Now, right there, what I think Jung is getting at is we presume to know what the human person is. And what he's saying is we humans have an infinite depth within us, an infinite depth to do unbelievable things, amazing things. And so both Jung and Teilhard said that God needs humankind to become whole and complete. But this is nothing different than the incarnation. That is what the incarnation is. If you go back to the early arguments, whether Jesus, was truly God, it's, a lot of this. It is precisely an expanded and higher consciousness which Jung believes God acquires through incarnation in humankind. Well, and he says God and humanity are an entangled state, and the individuation of each is bound up with the other. Now, we go, what does that mean? Well, then we read the mystics like Meister Eckhart, I pray God to rid me of God. Oh, isn't he wonderful? Catherine of Genoa, my me is God. So we have kind of come into where the mystics are all good, even though they're pantheists, but Jung says it and we're startled, out of our seats. But what we're saying is the more we come to the fullness of who we are, the more we are God in the flesh. The core of our identity, this is Merton as well, right? There's something at the heart of us. There is this incredible mystery, this pearl of great price. And the more we enter, that we seek that pearl, the more we enter into that center, the more we kind of shed our outer layers that keep us, bound, and the more we become truly free in the personhood that we are, and God radiates from our lives. That's what I mean. To Teilhard's words, union differentiates. The more I'm in union with another, the more I am myself, because it is the core of myself that's the basis of union. So Jung is saying the evolution of God and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated. In other words, God cannot come to be the fullness of life on earth unless we become into the fullness of our capacity for divine life. And of course, we call this theogenesis, the birthing of God. God and human are united in human consciousness, Jung says, as the depth meaning of history. This world will continue to struggle. It will continue to die off unless we have a religious evolution. It cannot hold at the level it's at. And what Jung is saying was we must rediscover the human person as the place where God is born, as the manger, to use our language, right? And that, he says, is what history is about. It's the birthing of God. And they're saying this is not what Christianity is about. It's what human evolution is about. Religion is a natural process of evolution. So he speaks of the co-redemption of divinity and humanity in one single and historically prolonged process. In other words, we save God from becoming irrelevant and dead, and God saves us from becoming irrelevant and dead. We need one another. And that, I think, what we're getting at here is the mystery of the Christ. Honestly, even though we have this message of Christmas, I think we have yet to really fully understand the incarnation, its significance for us. We have sort of encapsulated it into a formula, but both Jung and Teilhard recognize that we have yet to really enter into that mystery of incarnation. So Jung, there's three things, and I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. Both Jung and Teilhard rejected original sin because you can't reconcile original sin with biological evolution for Teilhard. For Jung, he just thought that it's not helpful, like to have this this sense of guilt and fallenness, which has really burdened the human. Second is that they do not see Jesus as the universal Savior. Now, this is shocking to the Christian life, right? But they do see, this is Jung, he sees Christ as the symbol of the self. And it's a rereading of the New Testament, is what it is. It's rereading those stories. We get conditioned. We read the same thing over and over and over, so it's hard for us to see this in a different light. But Teilhard Jung says Christ symbolizes the idea of the self. A symbol is that which participates in its reality and yet expresses that reality in a particular way. So what is the self? Jung speaks of it as the psychic totality of the individual. What is psychic totality? I mean, what does that mean for us? I just think, I think we live at superficial levels of consciousness. We live, say if we have 9 levels of consciousness, we live maybe on 2 of those, 2 or 3, you know. If we do some work, maybe 4. But what he says is that without integration of the self, there's no totality. And therefore, the whole process of humanization is the self-realization or individuation, which means for Jung, to become fully human is to become divinized, to become godlike. Incarnation and individuation are part and parcel. And basically what he's saying is that this is what Jesus achieved in his own life. So he interprets Chalcedon as a description of individuation brought to full consciousness. Jesus fully divine, fully human, in a complete union, right, of energies, we can say. I mean, we have the formula that Jesus is truly God, truly man, without change, division, confusion, or separation, you know, and somehow these natures have an exchange of properties. What does that mean for us? What does that really mean? We don't know. But we have a faith, you know, that says, yeah, we believe that's true. Jesus is God, and we're not. And Jung says, nope, Jesus is God, and he says, so too is every person. Now that's like shocking. I could hardly see myself as God, believe me, you know. And you might say the same. And here is where, one, I don't think we truly know what God is fully and what we are in our depth. And second, I think we have yet to really enter into what is the Christ. Who is the Christ? And that's the mystery here. It's the mystery of the Christic, which is what Teilhard wrote about. Teilhard, he saw these things. He was within the church as a Jesuit and did not write as explicitly as Jung because he was constantly being threatened with expulsion from the Jesuits and, you know, being excommunicated. But they're both thinking along the same lines. And basically, you know, what we're saying here is this process of becoming person, this fully integrated relational being, means we have to deal with evil. We have to deal with the evil within ourselves. We place everything outside ourselves. You know, like there are evil people out there. There are bad people out there. But what is our own darkness? What are our own obstacles? That's the process of individuation. And the psychological rule is that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Wow. In other words, if I don't deal with my own violence within me, it somehow is expressed out by me. In other words, the only way to really move into a world of peace and justice is to become that peace and justice, which is the process of individuation. It's much harder. This is what Jesus is about, right? Even in that going into the desert, I think symbolically Jesus faces the demons, his own demons. We tend to, again, spiritualize Jesus as if, you know, the devil might have shown up or something, but he himself had a dark side. He himself had things that might have been obstacles to his wanting to go into this ministry. And so When we remain divided within and do not become conscious of our inner opposites, Jung says, the world must then act out of this inner conflict and be torn into opposing halves. We are the violence of the world, and we are the solution to the peace of the world. But it does depend on how we make this process of individuation, incarnation. So, Jung says that consciousness must be brought into unconscious darkness in this self-transformative process of individuating and becoming whole. And, he, in his own time, drew out this schema of the levels of the persona, from the ego, which Ken Wilber would call the ego is that constricted self in that field of awareness, into that transformation of the ego into its more authentic self by dealing with our shadow sides, by dealing with the stuff that we tend to even subconsciously marginalize. We put it in a back pocket, like no one has to know, what I did or do or whatever. And and here's where I think the mystics, like a Meister Eckhart or even Teilhard himself, they encountered and they accepted. It's entering into the shadow side. It's reconciling it, and it's letting it. It's embracing it and then letting it go. That we can begin to live out of a deeper self. We have an immense capacity for God. We have an immense capacity for God life. That's what we're saying here. And so both Teilhard and Jung said we are saved not by a savior outside us. We are saved by becoming whole. Becoming whole first within us, Christ as the symbol of wholeness. And that wholeness, I think I take that, it means suffering. It means deaths. It means over and over again the dying. We call it the dying to self. But it's also reconciling the darkness of evil with the light of truth within oneself. And it's hard for us because I don't think any of us think of ourselves as having an evil side. But we have that chaotic side within us. We have that place where, we hold on to that chaos. And there's all sorts of stories, to say, like, how that evil is manifested. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. How we read those words. Do we follow Jesus? He's the example. Or do we try to live that way and that truth in the life in our own lives? What Jung is saying is without the integration of evil, no totality. And the key, therefore, to Christic life is not just entering into the love of God, it is actually encountering and reconciling the evil within us, the dark side within us. We all have it. And if we don't, maybe we don't have it. Maybe we don't know it. It's because we don't really know ourselves. How much do we allow ourselves to know ourselves? That's the whole, that's the whole journey here. So Teilhard says, we will be saved by an option that has chosen the whole. I look again at I think of someone like Francis of Assisi, who I know quite well, so I can speak of him. He was a very kind of materialistic person, loved parties, loved nice things, As he moves into that relationship with God, he begins to really focus. So it's a training of the mind. That's really what we're talking about, a training of the mind. We live in an age of tons of information. So we have spirituality here and, God here and, parties here, and it's all over. The saints just said one thing, God, that's it, God. And that's what Francis did. And Teilhard, it's that focusing the God center of the brain and the heart and just focusing on that. As Francis entered into that relationship with God, we see him shifting, He moves away, and it's all symbolized by the stories, right? He moves away from the friends, and he just starts recognizing his own humanness. And he says at one point, who are you, O God, and who am I? Who am I? And as he enters into that humanity, something breaks open. And that's what I take suffering and death as the breaking open of our lives. We're like vessels that hold a treasure. We have to break those open and allow ourselves to enter into the depths of what we are and then to find a freedom there. And I think that's what Francis did. And it comes from the stories, like rolling in the snow, and building snowman, stark naked, I might add. Going around and singing and preaching to flowers and trees. People said, this guy is crazy, right? That's what Jesus was about as well. He's a crazy guy. Who is this Jesus of Nazareth? Isn't he the carpenter's son? So we want to intellectualize, and we want a very logical Jesus, when the whole fact of Christianity is it's a marginal, chaotic religion, right? It lives out of an inner freedom of the self. It's saying God is here, and God is doing new things. God is this wellspring of potentiality, and he's living in you. But you want to box this God in. You don't even want to get to this God because it's kind of scary. What does it mean to live freely, right? That's what it means. What does that mean? And so we have all sorts of definitions, right? And we have all sorts of philosophical ideas. And what I think the saints are saying is, nope, if you really want a God life, then come to terms with yourself, and that's what Francis did, as many of the saints, that darkness. What is preventing? It's not so much what am I doing, but what's preventing me from really forgiving? What is preventing me from really being, you might say, adventurous in love, not just radical? And then I think, Francis got it. He said at the end of his life, I have done what is mine to do. May Christ teach you yours, right? Christ is coming to be. That's the whole point. So this is where Teilhard, if I can just go back to this thing up here, so Teilhard sees this whole process of Christ in evolution. Jesus is the way, and we too must continue that way in our own lives. Jesus is the Christ, and we too are the Christ. And the Christ is what is forming. So God is not out there. The whole Christian message is God has become not God to become God for us, God within us, God, as part of us. We are the mystery of Christ. That is the Christian message. And therefore, I think what Teilhard says is it's wrapped up in this hymn, in his hymn to matter, where he sees that this universe, see, if we go back to the direction of evolution, it's becoming something which eludes the scientists. They're many of them will say, there's no direction in evolution. But we have to say, yeah, there is a direction, actually. It's becoming something more conscious, more united, more relational. So Teilhard says a being was taking form in the totality of space, a being with the attractive power of a soul, palpable like a body, vast as the sky, a cosmic being, a being which mingled with things, yet remained distinct from them. God is not collapsed into matter. God is becoming something with matter, a being of a higher order than the substance of things with which it was adorned, yet taking shape within them. The rising sun was being born in the heart of the world. God was shining forth from the summit of that world of matter, whose waves were carrying up to him the world of spirit. So what Teilhard envisions is this whole process of evolution as one giant person in formation. It's as if the whole universe is giving birth to the Christ. Not as a religion, as the meaning of matter itself. Matter is made for God, and God is what, in a sense, makes matter enlivened with the fullness of life. So that's what, both Teilhard and Jung see, that the linchpin here is the human person. It's how we live, in this process of ongoing individuation. Now, let me just say this. I probably should just take a minute to process some of these ideas or get your questions here. But we humans, I think, we only know our capacity when we face limits. Last week I was with a friend of mine in Florida whose daughter, I don't know, does anyone know Nell Temple Brown? I don't know if you may know it. No. Her daughter, Bliss, at the age of 15, was playing basketball one day and with a taller kid. And the kid reached up to get the ball and came down, and his elbow hit Bliss in the neck and severed her spinal cord. This was a perfectly healthy, really bright young woman at the age of 15. Within a month's time became paraplegic. Loss of all muscle ability from toes up. So paralyzed, and her whole right side, which is right dominant, paralyzed. She said she had faced two choices. She was either going to wither in this, in this defeat of life, or she would rise up and do the best she could, each day to find that power within her to use her gifts. She went on to Stanford and majored in earth science at Stanford and moved in with this, in the disability section, run by a young man who was legally blind. Wheelchair and all, made her way through 4 years of college. In her senior year, she was crossing a boulevard near the university and had looked, all around to make sure nothing was coming. Sure enough, a car blinded by some tall grass did not see her and hit her in the wheelchair and threw her into the main boulevard. It would be like crossing the broadest street possible. And she's lying in the middle of the street wondering, is the driver okay? That was her first thought. Is the driver okay? That's what she was asked. But she broke both collarbones, the pelvis, bones, all broken. Went on to, for over a year in therapy, rehabilitation. There is something about this young woman that is, if we want to talk about a depth within us for life, like we have a power for love that sometimes only suffering can lead us to. She recovered, and she realized through that incident she wanted to help other people. So she graduated from Stanford, got a master's, and then took courses to get into medical school and went to Duke University Medical School, where she graduated first in her class, doing surgery and delivering babies with her non-dominant hand. I'm telling you, what she shows to me is we have an incredible capacity for life. And she is today the director of internal medicine for One Medical in San Francisco. And she married the guy who's legally blind. So he's legally blind, she's paraplegic, and they have 3 children.
What's her name again?
Bliss Brown, Dr. Bliss Brown, yeah. All of her story, and I'm sure there are other stories like this. I am telling you that we humans, we live too superficially and too narrowly. The power of love that is God is within us. We don't have to worry about something outside. There's no outside. God and us are entangled in this incredible wholeness of life. That's what we're saying here. If we could, do we have to get to a major accident to find that wellspring? That's the question. What does it take? I mean, we've constructed a world that allows us to be unattentive to these things, where our attention is constantly being pulled away. And maybe it does take recovering for a year in a nursing home with a lot of broken bones and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering to know that power within us. Teilhard himself, I'm sure, suffered it. He was exiled. He was not allowed to return to France. He asked several times. He had had 2 heart attacks and wanted to go back to his native country to die. And the Jesuits said, no, you cannot come back. You are too much of a problem for us in relation to the church. And they sent him to, now mind you, he was French, so they sent him to America where his English was a little okay, it wasn't great, to a community that had no idea who Teilhard was on the Jesuit community on 83rd Street. And when he died, no one knew him. They're like, this old Frenchman just died, you know, like the two novices said, so what do we do? And they just had the two novices and the superior carry his coffin up to Hastings-on-the-Hudson and buried him. So he died not knowing that his work would ever see the light of day. You see, we've developed this culture of success. Everyone has to be an idol. Everyone has to be successful, you know, when in fact, the real stuff of life is taking place in hiddenness. That's where God is. God is that power hidden within who will be unyielding in love. I will be with you until the end of time, because God is part and parcel of what we're becoming. And so I'm just saying that the good news is that we have the power to make God visible and alive in our midst. It's not something exceptional. It's as ordinary as forgiveness. It's as ordinary as getting up from broken bones and wanting to heal other people. You see, we have a power to help make this world really a better place. Now, I didn't mean to wrap this up so quickly, but maybe we could take some time, just at this moment, to process some things. We like process. And we want to just slow down a little bit. So where are you in this story? Where are you in this emerging story of the Christic, where God is the center and the power of your life? Where are you, and what do you want to be when you grow up? Just take some time for conversation, and then we'll come back.